Hey everybody, this is That Rugby Union Show. So good to be back. So much to talk about. I think my kids feel just before Christmas, when the lights have gone on in the shopping centers, even look enticing. Everybody's a little bit excited because Santa is coming to town. And I think I feel a little bit like that at unwrapping what is RASSIE'S first Springbok squad of the year, because it does signal the imminent start of the international rugby season. And we can start talking about what it means, who's in, who's out, rotation, depth, all those things that fans like talking about. And if you do want to join in the conversation, please do give us a like, share, subscribe, tell everybody that they're more than welcome to join in the convo. We do have a special guest joining us a little later, Gary Gold, former Springbok assistant coach, and maybe just the man to answer the question, what it is that went wrong with the Stormers this year. We know how good they've been in the URC, and I think they'll be very disappointed with an early exit, but also just somebody who's been there with the Springboks and maybe getting his 2 cents worth. And of course, there was Winkgate. I can't even believe I'm saying the words because it seems like an absolute ridiculous, unnecessary piece of drama. But hey, then again, some people live for the drama. Joining me as always, Xabanisa. I think the only reason I'd like Winkgate is that it sounds a lot like Winkgate, and there was something to be said about the look he had in his eye. But other than that, talk about a flash in the pan.
Listen, I have it on good authority that in certain circles in Ireland, Jaden is now considered a bit of a how do I put it? A bit of a winker, if you know what I mean. So,
Unbelievable stuff. Like, I can't believe how off it went. And maybe it's a signal of the times, it's a sign of the times. We live in the age of the internet. We live in the age of instant online comments. And I don't know, am I going mad, or did it just seem to escalate way more than something as menially stupid as something like this should?
it actually, this was meant to be my rant, the hypocrisy of it. You know what? Munster away team in Durban. If a Munster player does that, let's say Peter O'Mahony, like really innocent guy, never insulted anyone a day in his life on the rugby field. No, real church choir kind of like. Sorry, I just see that visual all over again. And like, Jaden looks like he's at the beach. He's got his arms lying back. It's literally like winking at some poor lady passing him by in a swimming costume. I mean, it's terrible. But anyway, if Munster do that as their away team and they win, suddenly they're the cleverest guys. They know how to get in under the Sharks' skin, in their heads, as as the chant now seems to go, especially when Irish and South African teams are playing each other. If the boot was on the other foot, or if the wink was on the other eye, if you want to really call it that, then suddenly totally different. Oh no, very acceptable. A guy just being smart, as they would say in football, not cheating. Other side, oh no, you can't have this in rugby union. You can't have guys taking things to these levels to try and to try and win rugby games. But it was a bit of a storm in a teacup. And entirely over exaggerated. And the big irony for me is, today's all about today's one of those weird sort of situations, especially with social media. You almost constantly find that everyone is so sensitive about there's so much political correctness in what people say, and by the same token, social media is actually quite in your face in terms of the banter, in inverted commas. And so what happens is, I find it interesting that this was pure banter, the same kind of banter that you would expect on social media after your side has lost. And suddenly everyone was having a meltdown about how it was so inappropriate. It didn't have a place in rugby. I know rugby is kind of going the football route, But that wasn't it. It was just it was just gamesmanship, which has always been part of rugby. Rugby's never been innocent in that regard. So yeah, it was a bit over egged a bit in terms of what actually happened. What, people still don't look at the mild fact that actually Jack Crowley did not miss his kick. And
Yes.
if I think Conor Murray tried to do something, a bit of intimidation of his own with Bradley Davids, shaking his hand before the kickoff, kind of like probably saying a few kind words like, yeah, I know you're not going to miss any of these. So, all's fair in love and war. And this time around, the Sharks won. Next time around, I suspect somebody else might win. And it might be South African fans who want to complain about it, but like there's no point sort of blowing it out of all proportion. Makes no sense.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely crazy. I'm like, have any of these people ever watched like a George Gregan play rugby and just I don't know, maybe it's just me. And also, Nick White going down like he was shot by a sniper after being touched in the hair by Fuff was certainly, I think, a lot more impactful on the game and the outcome. Like you say, he didn't go on to miss. The miss had already taken place. But we're doing it back to front this time around. So we'll start with what we usually finish with, and that was the Simbin. What do you mean, let's continue? We were already cheering for you. Do you have more?
No, I'm good, thank you. Listen, if I complain anymore about that incident, I risk this. I risk sort of like sounding exactly like the people I'm having a go at, over exaggerating the whole thing. So no. I've said enough on the subject. We can move on.
Yeah, no, and what a subject there is to move on to. In fact, 54 different subjects, and we've seen these 54 names before, which were named by Rassie Erasmus in that second alignment camp. So I suppose in terms of names, no surprise. And it also tells me that the Springbok management team is really viewing that Barbarians game as an extension of their camp. And I'm sure he will whittle it down, of course, before the Rugby Championship. But we're going to start with the forwards because it's a heck of a lot of names. And then we'll look at the backs in closer detail. But besides a young man from UCT, are there any surprises to that squad?
At some level, I suspect someone like Renzo du Plessis, he's hardly played for the Lions. I would say that's a surprise because I think Renzo literally started playing for the Lions in the URC after he made, I think it was the first alignment camp. So I would say that's the nearest thing to a surprise in that sense. And then the second sort of nearest thing to a surprise, again, no longer a surprise now because he made the alignment camp, or the last alignment camp, is Joano Augustus, because obviously Joano, under 20s, he was under 20s World Rugby's under 20 player of the year when he competed, in the under 20 championship. And in all that time, he's never looked close to making the Bok team. I think he's about 26 now. And suddenly, he's in line to make a cap. So I think those for me up in the forwards, that would be the supposed sort of surprises in terms of. And then if you want to talk surprise in terms of a mission, somebody like Yefan Ruiz, he didn't make, he already didn't make the last alignment camp. So I see there's been a consistency because this squad is basically the same squad as the last alignment camp. And so, I also suspect,
can I stop you there? Can I stop you at Evan Ruiz? Because some people are having a meltdown, talking about meltdowns about his non-selection, and I always think it's sometimes overblown because there are a lot of things that we don't see as fans. We might see the performance, but obviously the Springbok coach will require even more and things that we might not necessarily know about. I'm not saying for one moment that Evan Ruiz has no discipline or whatever the case is. We just don't know what it is that him and Rassie would have spoken about, but I'm sure they would have spoken.
Look, I think the bigger issue for anyone supporting Irfan right now is, geez, all you gotta do is go look at his last game for the Stormers at URC level. And, obviously, the Stormers got blanked by Glasgow Warriors in that quarterfinal. But by the same token, he didn't have a great game either. So it could be one of those, he didn't have a great game by, extension, or actually individually, he didn't have a great game either. Sometimes we want to talk as much as we can, but sometimes all you've got to say is, okay, let's just look at his last game. And his last game wasn't a great advert for what he can give you. So it wasn't exactly a response to missing out, on that alignment camp before the squad was announced. So sometimes you've got to look at those things. And like you say, there are discussions behind the scenes. I think it would be incredibly foolhardy to get rid of a number 8, to get rid of a number 8 his age, altogether. So he's got time. He's probably about what's he? He's probably about 24, going on 25. He's got time. He's got time, especially for the next World Cup. So whatever he needs to iron out, he's got more than enough time to be able to iron it out so he can play. It's just that it's a bit hectic when the box are a bit thin at number 8, because Jasper's still recovering from that. I know he's in the squad, but he's still recovering from that neck injury. So you would have imagined that they're looking for as many guys that have played for the box at number 8 to be in the squad as possible, and somehow that hasn't happened. That maybe on its own actually tells you a lot.
Yeah, no, but this is Rassie. We could see Cheslin start at number 8 and some craziness happen as well. I'm just saying. In fact, the name that I think a lot of people were anticipating, and because he came off the bench and played against Wales, won't be eligible for the Breakthrough Player of the Year at the end of the season, which I think is very sad. But for me, Cameron Hanekom is probably a man that it looks a show in, surely, just the way he's got about his things this year. I'm looking at the makeup of the loose trio potentially. I don't see a reason to drop him just yet. Peter Steff, undroppable whenever he comes on to play. Do you think I'm onto something, or is it too soon to tell? And maybe that combination isn't one that works.
Theoretically, I think you should be onto something, simply because, off the local 8s, Cam is probably, head and shoulders above them. And, it helps to play for the team which finishes highest of the URC sides in that competition. But don't throw away the possibility of someone like João Augustus leapfrogging him because he's playing for a team that made it all the way to the Champions Cup final, even though he didn't play because he was injured. So don't throw away someone like that, especially as you look at what the Boks are missing in terms of Kobus Visa. Sorry, not Kobus, Jasper. Yes, it's gonna happen now. These mistakes with the visas if they both get capped.
Yeah, and there is another Kobus.
Yeah, this is the problem. Put is there now. Now it's going to be, it's just going to be a visa issue, especially for us writers. But anyway, with Jasper, sorry, if he is going to replace Jasper, the nearest thing to a like-for-like replacement is actually João, because he's a big ball carrier. He's sort of, even in build, he looks like him. He's not a line-out option. But like João has probably got a little bit more than Jasper in the hands. And he's probably, got a bit more than Jasper again, and probably repeat effort since he's gone to Northampton Saints anyway. So I suspect that could be a thing, unless they're trying to go a different direction. If they're trying to go a different direction, then Cam is your guy, because not only can he play 8, is he a good link between backs and forwards in the old sort of classical way that you expect a number 8 to play. He's great on the tram lines. He is a great line-out exponent, and he's a complete nuisance over the ball as well, to the point where, Jake White actually played him at open side a few times for the Bulls. And so it's one of those, are they trying to go the same way, or are they trying to go, to go different, especially with the influence of, say, someone like Tony Brown with the attack. You know, when we talk attack, we always kind of like only imagine it involves the backs. No, it involves the forwards and what they can do too. You know, one of the great improvements of last year's attack was with ball in hand. You know, we saw the Ox that we'd always seen in the original days of the Cheetahs, running with the ball, able to offload, able to pass, and basically busting tackles. And so, you know, if that's the general plan, then maybe suddenly someone like Cameron Hanekom is the guy to go with, simply because he gives us, you know, he gives the Boxers something different to what they've always had. You know, instead of that blunt force trauma from number 8, if you're thinking Dwayne from Vermeulen, if you're thinking Jasper Wiese, you know, you've got a bit of silk still with you know, still with the iron fist behind the velvet glove, you know, but a bit definitely more velvet.
Yeah, thanks very much for the questions, guys. I appreciate them. And if you do have one, just drop them. Jono, I see yours, and I'll ask it in just a moment. Julian making some good points about stepping into Frans Malherbe's shoes and the uncapped players. There's a lot to talk about, like I said. And I think this weekend might provide answers, because massive all South African game, and I look at the 2 front rows and I see so much competition for the Box starting number 1, number 3 jerseys, and I think maybe we'll find out a little bit more after the weekend. But before we okay, we're not ready yet. We're going to have Gary Gold join us soon. So maybe let's ask, let me ask you the question that Donna asked him, which was future captains, saying Rassie has a big plan, big squad, or Rassie has a plan, a big squad. Your thoughts on a potential future captain after Sia? Surely it has to come from this group. And his call is Nortje from the Bulls, who has got the experience.
I must say, Nortje has been incredible as a leader and as a player. You know, it's so easy sometimes to kind of like damn our leaders with faint praise. I think it happens a lot with Sia. A lot of people kind of like take advantage of the fact that he's got such a wonderful way with players, the public, broadcasters, whatever. And the great sort of assumption is that, oh, he's not as good a player as he actually is. Sia is an incredibly good rugby player. And it's a similar thing again with, you know, with Ruan Nortje. I think, given how well he's led the Bulls, particularly this season, a lot of people kind of get into that whole, you know, you know what, he's not that great a player. At lock, it is going to be an issue, simply because he has to make sure that he's the starting lock. And that is not a given. It doesn't matter how you want to look at it, especially when you've got at number 5 lock, you've got Ergies Neyman, you've got Franco Mostert, who's still there, and you've got Lood de Jager returning. And then, you know, if you want to think about him as a blindside flank, with all this blindside flank that he's playing at the Bulls, you know, he's got to get past Peter Steph du Toit. That's a tall order. And so what I'm saying is, if he is going to be considered as a captain, he has to first guarantee himself a place in the starting lineup, which would respect, as things stand now, I think even he would say maybe not, even though he was the incumbent last year due to all the injuries that everybody suffered.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting to see, and I agree with you. I think people do underestimate Sia on the field as a player, and I look at him this season, where the Sharks have very often flattered to deceive, but I look at where they are now. They're in the semi-final of the URC, and in large part, he got them out of a couple of very tight games, just through individual brilliance at times over the course of the season. Do believe we've got Gary joining us. Absolute pleasure for you to join us, and let's see if we can get him on. Former Springbok assistant coach, USA Eagles head coach, director of rugby. Is there anything, Gary Gold, that you have not done besides being a bad man? Because you're a good guy.
Hello, gentlemen. How are you? Nice to see you both. How are you keeping?
No, cool, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. I when I last saw you, I think I still had hair. I'm glad we go to the same barber now. I've caught up. Yeah, but Gary, thanks so much for joining us. I know you've had to delay your travel as well tonight, and I'm really, really grateful because I was saying to Sim earlier that I'm just excited whenever the international season comes around. We already are down to the Springbok squad, and perhaps we'll revisit it in a short while. Before we do, what have you been up to, Gigi?
No, good. Thank you guys for having me on. Pleasure to see you both again. No, it's been a good time. I've spent some time over the last near year now back in Cape Town, spending time with the family, which hasn't happened for a very long time. And been doing some research stuff around rugby, playing around in the data sphere, and having a look at the integration of AI within the game, which has been very, very interesting. And then I've been doing some stuff with World Rugby, where I've been on the coaches panel where we've been working with the referees around the world. So we did the Rugby Championship last year, November Internationals, and then we've just concluded the Six Nations. So just just working with the referees and the coaches around the improvements around the game, the consistency around the law interpretations, etc., etc. So it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun. Yeah.
Wow, Gary. I know the moniker Rugby IQ has always been something that you've gone for over the years. So I'm really glad that you're doing the stuff that I know you really enjoy. Not to say that you didn't enjoy the other parts of the game. I've enjoyed a couple of tours with you, some memorable moments. I think we watched Ras Dumisani live together. I think we had some great tours.
We did.
I think we did. Yeah,
We
had
did.
some
Yeah.
tours to Italy, which ended up an absolute disaster for restaurant owners. But memorable for memorable for us. And yeah, I'll
It
always
did.
remember you as one of the best tourists. And I'm thinking back at your time. You had quite a trio: yourself, Tekibio, and Peter de Villiers. And Div got a lot of flack from people, but sure, I think those days behind the scenes in the Springbok squad, I've never seen more drama up front, and I've never seen more fun at the back. And also, I must add, never seen a more talented group of rugby players come together. To beat the British and Irish Lions, to win in New Zealand,
Yeah.
to win the Tri Nations. What a team, and what a time!
Yeah. It was a special time, as you say, actually, on and off the field. I'm sure both of you remember very well Sim as well. So, some incredible times, absolutely brilliant memories, and some tough times as well. Obviously, it wasn't always plain sailing. I mean, 2009 was an incredible year, but 2010 was a bit of a disaster, and we rebuilt really nicely, but just an incredible bunch of players, incredible group of men. I mean, it's quite sad, really. I mean, when you think about in life, I suppose, you look back at things now, and it's human nature. I get it, but sometimes you don't realize when you're in the moment how lucky you are to be in that place with that group of players. And we were very lucky. I don't think any of us fooled ourselves, particularly Peter Dick and myself, about the understanding of, firstly, the good work that Jacques had done and the level that the team were at in 2007 when we took them over at the beginning of 2008. But I also feel, for all his eccentricities, I felt that Peter never really got the credit he deserved in the good that he did around the group. Keeping the group together, building the gears within the group, taking an already very successful group and making them more successful. That could have been a group of players who rested on their laurels and just went through the motions. And if we had lost to the British and Irish Lions, I'm not sure we would have even survived. But to then go on and win a Tri Nations and win it in New Zealand. So, I mean, he achieved a lot. He actually achieved a lot. An unbeaten end of this year tour was against three powerhouse teams. He did a good job, but the players were sensational, and just very sad how it ended in New Zealand in 2011.
Yeah, no, I was there to experience the hurt as well, and funny story, like SuperSport at the time. For those who don't know, the broadcaster I was working for had sent a huge team to New Zealand. I can't remember how many people, maybe 20 of us or something, and makes sense because there's a lot of ground to cover. And sure, the moment you guys went out, and this is the cruelty of the World Cup for the teams, is that the day that you lose is the day you find out that you're flying the next morning, potentially the next evening or the day after. It's that quick, it's that swift. And I sort of rubbed my eyes out, and the next day, all of the team left, and I was the only one left in New Zealand to cover a show and go and do press conferences and run around like a mad banshee, and ended up in a situation where I was sitting in the studio saying, "Well, we went to the All Blacks press conference yesterday, and there's me standing outside saying, well, we are at the Springbok at the All Blacks press conference today." So that's just the things that can happen behind the scenes at a World Cup. It's very cruel. It's very heartbreaking. And then I think what a lot of people also don't see is that group effectively disintegrates and has to be reconstituted again. Do you feel like to be nice to have a chance to actually have said, "Cheers, fellas, well done," and still, despite that performance or the loss against Australia, because the performance was awesome. You guys were a worthwhile team.
It was because of a different performance that they went out, wasn't quite there. The rare.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it was you're 100% right. I mean, if you remember, it was a late kickoff on a Saturday night, I think it was. I can't remember what day of the week it was. It was a late kickoff, and by the time we got back to the hotel, it was about 11 o'clock at night. I mean, we were all still a bit shell-shocked, in terms of what had happened. And then we got to the team room just to be told, the first group of guys are on the flight at 4 o'clock in the morning. So, and it must have been 11 o'clock at night. So a handful of guys just literally showered, packed, and waited for the bus to take you to the airport the next day. So, before we even blinked, we were on the aircraft on the way home. And as you say, X, then you land in Johannesburg, or I think the Sydney flight lands in Johannesburg, and then you just disperse. So it was tough. It's the nature of professional sport, I suppose. I watched an unbelievable game of tennis last night, and I don't even know why we're talking about it, but I thought of that as well. I thought of the guy who loses the game. It was 10-12 last night that the game finished, and Zverev is probably going to go back to his hotel room, pack his bag, and he's probably back in his hometown this morning. So it's the amazing things that happen in the world of sport that so many people don't see. And there's a lot more of those type of days and nights, and that actually do happen, that people don't realize about. But that's professional sport for you. That's the beast.
X, a bit earlier, you spoke about how Peter took a lot of flack. I suspect I would have been responsible for a fair bit of that flack. I think Gary will agree. When he talks about what they got achieved, or what they achieved, or what the credit that didn't go to Peter. One of my observations, by the end of Peter's tenure, was that he was probably the only guy that could do that job sort of going forward. When you look at a guy like Jake White, he likes to sort of be a bit schoolmasterly in how he runs his teams. And, it's quite tricky to sort of turn around and look at World Cup winners and be like, well, guys, we're going to go on exactly the same way as we have. And so when Peter came in and kind of like allowed those guys to have their heads a bit in terms of, you know what, these guys have won a World Cup. They know a fair bit of what they can do, so we can add what, you know, we bring as new coaches and sort of take this thing forward. So yeah, it's one of those things, you know, that there was always this flack that Peter did take, unfairly at times, if I'm being, you know, if I'm being brutally honest. But yeah, it's just one of those things. I just thought, you know, it'd be good to sort of like say it from the side of the guys who really were unfair to him, as in, you know, us, the media. But Gary, what I wanted to ask you, just looking at, you know, if you're having a look at data at the moment in terms of, you know, one of the things you're doing, what are those numbers that you guys crunching telling us about which way the game is headed?
Great question, actually, Sim. So to try and simplify it, and I want to exonerate myself a little bit and just say that I'm not at all suggesting that we now coach by numbers. I'm not saying that at all. The data has always been, in my opinion, and will always be for me, just a guideline. It's a guideline, and it's a foundation to then build on other facts and other opinions. Again, we have a responsibility as coaches, in my opinion, that the level of accountability as a professional sportsman now is high. As you've quite correctly said, now we're held to account by the stakeholders, which is sponsors and people who invest, but also fundamentally by the most important stakeholder, which is the fans, you know. And so we're answerable to that. So when I think when you're sitting as a coach now and you're trying to help develop a player to become a better player, or you help to develop a player to improve on a current performance, you have to do that by basing it on the facts. And so all I've really gone and done is taken the facts of a game, so the contributions that the players make in a game, and I've had a look at that across the board. But what AI has been able to help us with is basically being able to crunch those numbers. So we've done that. We've done that in the past. We've had spreadsheets. We've had lots of very valuable information. The website, when you populate the machine learning apparatus, whatever you choose to use, you populate correct information, ask it question, a wide variety of answers across. So I'll give you a simple example. I can take the data across a competition. Let's take the Six Nations for you. Can take all 50 nations. I'm assuming I often double check the stats, but they very often are. And then I will put that into the machine. I will give it context in terms of if certain aspects within the game maybe need to be weighted with a little bit more emphasis than something else. So creating a turnover might be weighted a little bit higher than just a normal ball carry where you get yourself over the advantage line. Getting over the advantage line by maybe more than 1.5 meters and what they call post contact meters, maybe it's weighted a little bit more. So again, it's not an exact science. You're just trying to give an equation in terms of the player's performance. But now I can go into the data and I can say, right, give me 3 aspects of the game that was relevant in the teams that won, that was not evident when the teams lost a game. And it's that kind of information and data that I'm getting out now, which is particularly interesting. So one aspect, for example, is whether we like it or not, and it's irrelevant, it's not my opinion, it's only a fact. One of the pieces of information coming out is kicking. So kicking within the game of rugby, general play kicking, is having a very big effect on outcomes of games. but you can't just say kicking. And that is a type of kicking game that has a very specific purpose, that gets you into an area of the field that allows you to win a certain amount of ball back, because it's that combination between having a certain amount of kicks, but also not compromising on the amount of times that you carry in the game. So you're not losing your attacking edge. So it's not, I don't mean to be rude, but it's not our being the Springboks model of a handful of years ago where we just kick and chase and tackle. And we actually don't even care if we don't get to see the ball. It's not that at all. The modern game and the better teams are asking questions around the kicking game, but be careful, because if something goes wrong and your defensive line is not good, they're going to run at you, and you're going to have some serious questions to answer in terms of broken field running and in terms of the attacking game that they're going to launch off that kicking game. So that's the type of pictures that it's showing us at the moment now, and it's quite. I want to try and I try to simplify it, but it's quite profound. I mean, there is definitely there's a little bit of a secret sauce. There is, and teams around the world that have that secret sauce are your Leinsters of the world, Bulls to a degree, Ireland, the Springboks definitely, Bordeaux, very good example. I don't think anybody saw that coming, but go and have a look at Luca's game management for the Bordeaux team. They actually kick the ball a lot, but you don't get this perception that they're not a ball in hand team, because they've got arguably two of the 4 or 5 best wingers on the planet, and yet they still score tries. How does that happen? And their game management is very, very good. With Luca and Jalibert, they manage the game very well. And they put you under extreme pressure. But the minute you take excuse the pun, take your eye off the ball, they're going to run you. They're going to run you ragged. And there's a handful of teams that are doing that well. They're doing that really well.
Yeah, I remember you a
Gary,
couple
you
of years
spoke-
ago.
Oh, sorry.
It must have been. Sorry. So I think my internet's a bit
All
slow,
good.
so there's a bit of a lag. But I do remember you a couple of years ago trying to point out just how much that McCaw Carter All Blacks team of, I think, probably 08, 09 to 12, just how much kicking they did do, but always gave the impression that all they did was run it at defenses, but that's not it at all. But Sim, I'll hand over to you. And Jono, I do see your question. I'll ask it after this one.
No, I was gonna push Gary on his identification of the secret sauce to talk about, a secret sauce of of a different kind. So a bit earlier, you spoke about how difficult 2010 was for you guys as a BOK coaching group. And over the years, if you go back in Springbok history, over that 4-year tenure, because usually a coach tends to last at most 4 years. It's only Rassie who's kind of like, gone as long as he has. There's always a year off the dip. I think if you look back at, obviously with you guys as of 2010, if you look back at Rassie, that was, not Rassie, Jake White, actually, that was probably 2006 when they lost 49-0 to Australia. And, when you look at that sort of year, is there a way yet to predict that dip? And when you look at this current crop, and be careful how you answer that, because Rassie may not answer your calls afterwards. When you look at this crop, when might that happen before 2027?
I don't anticipate that it will. I mean, it depends what you're talking about in terms of a dip, but I don't anticipate the Springbok team currently at the moment to have a dip like we had in 2010, Jake had in 2006. Heineke had 1 year, I can't remember, I was abroad, so I don't really remember what year that was. I don't anticipate this group with this crew now to have that in this 4-year cycle. And the reason I don't believe that is because of exactly what you just said, because Rassie was allowed a tenureship to stay on. And you know, Jake won a World Cup and he wasn't allowed to stay on, and so I applaud that as a decision. And I think Rassie should have stayed on even if they didn't win the 2019 World Cup in any case. And obviously the 2023 World Cup as well. Even if we didn't win that, I most definitely think he should have been there, because another thing that I've spent time doing some studies over the years, not recently, but a few years ago, was on team cohesion. And there are studies out there on team cohesion and how that works. And I think the longer you spend together as a group, like in the case of the Rassie with his management team, and I know there's been some changes, but by and large, there's a lot of consistency. If you consider Dion's been there a long time, Sticky's been there a long time, you know, there's a lot of core guys that have been with Rassie, walked the road with him. Felix is now back again, so that's keeping the cohesion there as well. Is you start to see those potholes before they arrive, and I've seen that now in terms of. I'll give you an example of how I see it. I see how the net has been spread so wide last year with the amount of players that have been picked in the larger squads of the Springboks. Have a look at the group of players now at the moment, about 50 oddish, who are now coming into alignment camps and are getting that type of feedback. It does two things. Firstly, it prepares the next cab off the rank to make sure that he is up to speed with what is going to happen, how they play the game, what is expected of them within the Springbok camp environment. That's the first thing. And the second thing, which we mustn't underestimate, is I heard you guys talking about Ruan Nokia. If you're bringing a Ruan Nokia, who is an exceptional rugby player, and you bring him into a camp environment, don't underestimate the pressure that's putting on an Archie and a Mostert and a Luert when he comes back, and the current guys that are there. It puts them under a lot of pressure, and it gives Rassie opportunities to say, well, you know, there's no reason at all for us to coast. There's no reason at all for us to go through the motions. In fact, if Ruan Nokia wants to step up to the plate, you know, I've probably got to try and get him 30 to 40 caps before the next World Cup. We'll fill their place with those guys quickly. And that's what I think they've done, and he's done that so well. You know, I think his vision and his planning has been so good in terms of bringing those guys in. I don't think it's a box-ticking exercise. Don't think that those guys are just coming in because he's ticking a box. Not at all. There's a real double-edged sword there from point of view of, yes, there's a group of guys who are going to come in and just get the exposure, maybe not play much, but there's there's guys in that periphery. Edwell van der Merwe, a guy, for example. He's unbelievably good. You know, he's an excellent rugby player. I mean, he will be putting our guys under pressure. You know, Chesy and Kurtie and those guys will be under pressure because he's world class. You know, and he must put them under pressure. You know, and he'll probably get a run out against, I don't know, the perfect year this year for Rassie. You know, against Barbarians, Italy, Georgia. You can give some very good rugby players some test match experience, you know, and you know, then all of a sudden it's a headache from his point of view to select the guys, but it's a really great headache to have. So I think that is a way of avoiding it, keeping guys on their toes, so you avoid that that curve that comes along where you've got older players and you want to continue to pick them because of their experience. We made that mistake with one or two players, definitely in 2011. And that's no disrespect from them. They centenary Springboks. But, you know, we probably in hindsight hung on to them a little bit too long. You know what I mean? And the time to make that decision was never going to be June of 2011. That should have been a decision we made in June 2010. We should have been starting to put guys under pressure and bringing just a handful. And I'm talking about a half a dozen at most, bringing the next handful of players into camp and giving a real, you know, we did it with Heinrich Rousseau was a good example. You know, Heinrich came to the fore in 2009 and then he shot lights out and he came in. Flo was another one that he came up, and so he came through the ranks as well. And you were putting your Pierce Spices and your Joan Smiths and your Skultburgers under pressure. But they were rising to the occasion. They were playing well. But those guys were putting everybody else under pressure. But I don't think in hindsight we did that well enough, and I think he does that very well now.
I'm glad you got stuck into the Springbok stuff, because that's what we were talking about as you joined us. And I don't know how long I can keep you. I said half an hour. I lied, Gigi, because we were getting stuck into the props. And I was saying to Sim that this weekend's match between the Bulls and Sharks, when you look at the front rankers, I'm very excited to see in Tlabeka and you get a go there. But I look at the front rowers, and obviously Frans Malherbe out is a huge loss. It would be for any team. But there is quite a bit of depth that has been built over the last season, the last international season. And I can't wait to see these guys go hammer and tongs at each other. And then the other, while we're looking at the front rankers, the way that Thomas du Toit has been going about his business overseas is unbelievable. Everybody's got everything but anything bad to say about him. And Sim, we spoke about potential captain material, or somebody who can cover the leadership position. I think he's one of those guys now. I think he's become a senior player. I think he's actually a very good leader. I don't know what the merits would be of having a prop as a captain. Also, just in terms of selection and stability and the amount of churn over the course of a game. But Gigi, the front rankers, despite Frans Malherbe being out, you got two big scrums going up against each other on Saturday.
No, you do have. Absolutely. I mean, France is obviously a loss, as is Kitsy, They're two immense individuals who've obviously been literally and figuratively the cornerstone of our team over the last both World Cups. Brilliant rugby players, but brilliant guys as well, and so good for the whole team ethos of the Springboks. But you're 100% right. I mean, just look at that list, and look at the competition there, and just the two front rows that are playing this weekend is going to be. I mean, for Rassie, it's like a trial match for him, You could arguably say that the level of the game this weekend, and I don't mean this with any disrespect, is probably going to be higher than some of the test matches that they're going to play this year, with some of the opposition that are coming. So, I mean, it's brilliant that you've got such a healthy situation, and that, we have 3 out of our 4 teams qualified for the playoffs, and I mean, you can't really say the Lions played badly this year. I think they had a couple of unlucky results, but gee, they started off really well, and I was convinced that they were going to make the playoffs as well. So you're right, X. I mean, I can go through the whole list with you, but those are some pretty darn good front rows there as well. And don't forget, the silent assassin, the gentle giant Wilco Louw. I mean, look what Wilco's doing. I mean, he's guys around the world and podcasts that I've seen or every now and again touched on from Europe and teams like that, they just can't believe this behemoth that comes onto the field there. And, he's just, he doesn't just scrum as well, that frame gets around the field as well. He's really effective at his carries, and he's unbelievable in the lineouts, and he's just so good, and then the Sharks boys are really playing well as well. So and then, as you say, Thomas playing so well for Bath overseas. So yeah, it's a very healthy situation that we're in at the moment.
Sim, is it oversimplifying it if I looked at this team and thought Rassie's trying to build 3 international teams here?
No, it isn't. It's probably more or less accurate. I mean, like Gary, funnily enough, I happen to subscribe to the idea that he's one of the guys. I mean, we talk about how many experienced players the Boks have. So I did this little exercise last year where I counted how many of the Bok players will be 35 and over at the next World Cup. And I came up with literally 15. That's active, not even someone like Kitsy who's just retired, being forced to retire. So you look at that and you think, oh, geez, you got to do something about those players, because that's going to be a problem come 2027. When you see this level of sort of like having almost 3 guys per position, That's exactly what Rassie's trying to address. And the really good thing about South African rugby is that not only do you have the URC sort of churning out talent on an annual basis, and you've also got all these guys out in England, out in Ireland, out in France, and out in Japan. Also, sort of like some of the guys slip the net, but they'll go to to England or France or wherever, or even Wales in Manus van der Merwe's example, and then he still comes back into the system because Rassie also took care of that rule, which basically meant that we wouldn't always be able to have the best possible players for us. So I think no, it's not oversimplifying it to say he is building, he's building depth. And you have to remember Rassie's mandate when he first took over in 2018. I think literally he said it was three things: it was to win, to build depth, and to transform. If you look at what the Boks have done in that last 6 years or so, you'd have to say he's done it right in all three sort of instances.
Yeah, and I mean, if you consider now,
last one.
if you were to equate that to, sorry, Xe, if you were to equate that to like an investment that's gained some interest. I mean, the level of interest he's got on that bank account at the moment now. I mean, I think if the Springboks, and it won't happen, but if the Springboks were to go through a year and win 30% of their test matches, but he was still developing players, and you could see that there was a plan, as you can always see there's a plan with Rassie, then I think the Springbok supporter would be a little bit miffed that we're not winning, but I don't think it would be hue and cry. I don't think you'd have people burning their jerseys anymore, because I think they'd understand that there's a proper plan now. So it looks like it just looks like there's a plan. Always looks like there's a plan for me, and it just looks like we all know Rassie. We all know how meticulous he is, So, but I mean, you just look across that squad. I mean, look at those loose heads that they've got there. I mean, you've got Gerard Steenenkamp. Gerard Steenenkamp is so good. It's frightening. Just because he's a quiet, understated guy. Ntshinga is there. Thomas can play on both sides. He's playing on both sides for Bath. And you've got who was the third one that I thought of? Yes, of course, Jan Hendrik. Jan Hendrik, who can cover you at loose head and hooker. So when you start to have a look at like the balance of, we call them swingers, but it's not in that way. It's in a rugby term, where you've got Ox, you've got Jan Hendrik, you've got Gerard Steenenkamp, and you've got Thomas. Jan Hendrik can cover you at hooker and at loose head, and you've got Thomas who can cover you at loose head and at tight head. You're covering so many bases at that time, and then you've got an out and out world class loose head in Ox and Ntshinga, and then we haven't even started on the tight heads yet with Vincent, Asanati, and Vilko, and it's just it's an embarrassment of riches.
Yeah, I was going to. We haven't even looked at the backs, even let alone the locking combinations and pairs that he's got. All very, very talented. The new names that come in, someone like an Ethan Hooker had a great season. But I wanted to touch on this selection of Ntokozo Makaza. I don't want to make too much of it because he is a young man, only just played Varsity Cup. But I think for me, I'm very excited by the selection, because it forces my eye to the fly half berth, because he's got such a good, solid kicking boot. He really is, dead-eye goal kicker. And isn't that exactly what this Bok team has been calling out for? Just a little bit more depth, a little bit more of an assurance package, as it were, and an opportunity for Mani to reclaim maybe the starting berth, maybe fight for a starting berth, knowing that Pollard is sitting on the bench as a bit of an insurance policy, and then also you've got the young Ntokozo who could also serve that role. So it tells me that we might not necessarily be selecting a fly half, but selecting based on the opposition that we might face on any given day.
Yeah, if you're asking me, I would have to agree with that as well. I mean, the one thing we've become used to now with Rassie and the thinking of the Springbok management team is there's no such thing as out the box. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't start seeing centers throwing the ball in at the line out or other people kicking at goal. I mean, none of those are even out there suggestions compared to if I'd said to you 3 or 4 years ago that you could potentially see a Springbok team going 7-1. I think you would have laughed at me. But, so nothing is out the box if it works for the team, if it's the best thing for the team. And if Mani is the one that the Springbok management team want to see as a playmaker, then and they're worried that his goal kicking is going to weigh on his shoulders. Well, then find somebody else to do that job. There's many teams in the past who've been in that situation where you've had fullbacks who are goal kickers, or other guys in other positions. So I don't even think that's a difficult situation for the Springbok management team. And yes, if he is as reliable as he is under those pressure situations, then yes, it's another string to their bow. And I think they take all those things into consideration when they are selecting the group and how the group play together.
I don't want to forget Jonah's question, and it does take us a little bit away from the Springbok team, but he was obviously listening in when you're talking about your using of data. And he asks, says he'd like to hear your perspective about the controversial yellow and red cards. Is there any way of penalizing a team while still keeping 15 versus 15, which is, I think, an ongoing debate. It's not going to end anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, again, I do think Jono asks a very relevant question, and to put your mind at ease, the lawmakers are asking those questions as well. They are acutely aware of that. I think now that they've adopted the 20-minute red card, I'm surprised. I'm actually really surprised that there's so many people who are anti that. I'm really surprised about that. So there's two things that are at play at the moment now. So the one thing is that there's a decision that's been made, whether we like it or we don't. There's a decision that's been made that the game has to be made safer. And that has been determined around tackle height and collision height and head contact. And so they needed to mitigate against that. And they did that by bringing in tackle height situations. Now, to change behaviors, you have to change consequences. And the consequences were, as it was in the past, a yellow or a red card if there's head contact. But it did skewer the level of the game. And you were having an accidental head collision after 5 minutes in a game, and the guy was having to leave the field because it met the red card requirement, and that was hectically penalising the team. And it was unproportionately penalising them because it wasn't an act of maliciousness. It was a timing. You take Damien's a couple of weeks ago. Damien changed direction at the last minute. It's an instinctive thing to do. Absolutely no malice in that whatsoever. And I would like to see situations like that be seen for what they are. He's left the field. It's a 20-minute red card. The Stormers, after 20 minutes, can get another player back on. I don't want to see Damien get banned for that. I want that to be deemed as it was an accidental situation. He suffered his punishment. But that's where they've landed at the moment now. And so not sending anybody off at all, in answer to Jono's question, isn't an option at the moment. It's the yellow card if it meets mitigating circumstances of hips and dropping, and he's tried to drop his height, etc., etc. And then the other mitigating circumstance they said is, okay, well, we accept the fact that that's not malicious and that doesn't fall into foul play. So he will have to leave the field because they are trying to say the consequence for that is that player has to now go and think long and hard about how he's going to change his behavior. And I mean that as in not a patronizing. I mean, he's going to have to lower his tackle height. That behavior, I mean, but then the team don't get heavily penalised by the fact that somebody can come back on. So that's where they've landed at the moment. There isn't another solution at the moment for the teams to stay 15v15. There isn't another solution at this moment in time.
Yeah, but But Gigi, I mean, this is my gripe, and I understand how a player can be yellow carded for something that is deemed dangerous. But and maybe I'm giving away my age, and when I started watching rugby, to me, a red card was, and obviously it's changed, based on whether there was malice or malicious intent, and hence, and this is the way I always read it in the past, hence it weighs on your team because you maliciously did something. Now, a high hit, very difficult to prove if malice was intended, and I think this probably started with ELVs and tip tackle and trying to figure out if over the horizontal was dangerous rather than there was malice intended. I don't think we can reverse it now, but I think we've put ourselves in a situation where a red card is not for foul or dirty play. A red card is for technical infringements now. And I kind of feel like those were the preserve of the yellow card. It's almost like we've taken the red card and dropped it to the level of a yellow card, and we have nothing at the top. And maybe that's what it is that has people saying, oh, I don't like the red card, because there isn't that really big stick that you could hit a team with to say, you guys are just foul or you dirty, or, the way you're going about playing the game is not fair to whatever the spectacle, the fans, whatever the case is. But maybe I'm being too conspiratorial, or maybe I've just swung too hard talking about swinging. Just wanted to bring that
back. You make a very good point, X. You make a very good point. I hadn't really thought about it in that sense. I think where the lawmakers are looking at it at the moment is they're trying to change the behavior. That's what their language is. They want people to be working really hard at training sessions on dropping their body height. But I must say it's a very interesting point that you bring up in terms of if there is deemed an accidental head collision, is that worthy of a yellow card, potentially, and maybe the red card should only be to be brought up for thuggery and a punch or a finger in the eye or a stamp or something. The one word you've got to be careful of, that I know the lawmakers are very, very careful of, is intent, because it's very difficult to judge somebody's intent. And guys are very clever. I mean, you see something as harmless as rolling away. You see guys throwing their hands and legs and everything in an attempt to roll away. They're not trying to roll away. That's not happening. Well, the minute we start going down that road, we're getting ourselves into trouble. There's enough grey areas within rugby. So intent is not on the table at the moment. It's been taken off the table because they don't necessarily want the officials to be judging what an intent is. So they try and keep it black and white by saying, was head contact made? Was the perpetrator, was he able to change his behavior? But I do think there's merit in what you're saying. I think maybe the punishment doesn't fit the crime, is what you're saying. And maybe what it should be is, maybe it should only be maybe it should be a 20-minute yellow card. I don't know, but they are trying to change the behavior of the game. I mean, we could get into a whole debate, which I really don't want to get into, but you could get into a whole debate about, it's a little bit like two boxers getting into a ring and saying, don't hit me in the head. You sort of boxing, guys. I mean, the whole purpose of the exercise is to hit each other. The whole purpose of an exercise is to tackle each other. And some of the worst injuries I've seen is when a guy's tackling perfectly legally and he catches the guy's hip bone. He catches him on the pointer over here, and he's knocked himself out. So again, it's a minefield. Yeah, it's a minefield.
Yeah. I've got a question for you, which I once heard asked about on this front, and it was, did rugby, this is going to be terrible to ask, did rugby make a mistake by trying to prove that it's not a dangerous sport? Because it is. We know it is. If you've ever stepped onto a rugby field, you know you're taking a risk, and you know you want to dish it out as much as you're going to receive it. And I'm not saying that we should make the game purposely unsafe, but we've boxed ourselves into a corner where now we have to be safe because we've claimed it so or deemed it so.
Yeah, look, before I try to answer that because I don't think that's an easy question to answer.
Philosophical rugby.
I'm going to start by saying, in adjudication of the slight difference between the two of you in terms of, is there enough punishment versus is the punishment, severe. My thing is, just try to imagine Bucky's Botha today and work out whether you need these red cards or yellow cards. You see, that's a first. That's one way to say, you know what, you need to keep going the way you're going, because if Bucky's was loose on these guys in this day and age, yes, it wouldn't be a nice place to be. But anyway, to try and answer that question, it's quite tricky. Look, anytime anyone gets on a rugby field, it's actually a bit like Gary was saying. It's a bit like boxing or any other sort of combat sport, where literally the first quality before your athleticism, your skill, or whatever you want to look at, the first quality that's important is your bravery. You need to be brave to get into a ring, an octagon, or a rugby field. So that's a non-negotiable. But there has to be a limit in terms of your bravery, because there's a fine line between bravery and stupidity. And frankly, I think all rugby are trying to do is to mitigate, or to make sure that guys are often on the right side of that line instead of constantly blurring it. Because the problem with those lines is the only time you've crossed it is after you've crossed it. You never sort of don't stop it until you've crossed the line. So I commend rugby, because if rugby is to make it as a brand, it needs to be seen as safe. And that's how, I've got an 11-year-old. He's small for his age. I'd love for him to play rugby, just not because he's going to become a Springbok one day, just to sort of get the whole rugby ethos into him, being one of 15 people all in charge of trying to sort of achieve the same. The camaraderie and trying to achieve the same goal. It teaches you to play your part so that everybody can get to where they're trying to get to. His mother has no interest in that. And the reason she has no interest in it is because, well, she takes one look at it and she says it's dangerous. And so you do need to sort of, whether we like it or not, we need to eradicate that reputation that rugby has. Rather donate the reputation to the UFC, mixed martial arts, and be like, you know what, with Trickers and them, they're really dangerous. Pass it on to them. But rugby has to be seen as a place where you might need sort of moral and physical courage and still be safe. That's kind of like how I look at it.
No, I think there's merit in that, and I don't feel I have to say this, but I choose to say this. I do think rugby. I think Sim has made a very good point there. I think rugby has really tried to stay a step ahead of the game. It has tried, whether we like it or not. What did happen in NFL did happen. It has happened. Concussions became an issue, and lawsuits were brought about. And I think rugby is just trying to stay ahead of the game and be smart and still make it an enjoyable game without having to make it dangerous. So they're just trying to cover both sides of the coin.
I love those answers. It just means that, Gigi, our conversation is not going to be done today. But my little dog here is starting to bark at me, and I think it's because she's seen me sit through. If she sees me sit through an hour of a Teams meeting, I think she starts getting antsy. So she probably thinks I'm suffering and wants to save my life. And we haven't even touched on the URC semi-finals. So let's very quickly just look at those. And then Gigi, I'll let you go because really I'm grateful for letting us steal so much of your time. Leinster, Glasgow, there's South African interest in all 4 games. It's not just the 2 that are being played at Loftus, from a Leinster point of view, from a Glasgow point of view. And Sim said something very interesting before we came on, and I actually want to pick his brain about it. But your take, Gigi, first. When you look at both games, do you see anything in particular? There she goes.
I see the fact that I hope you're not going to ask me to make a prediction on either of these games. That's what I do see. I think what this competition has done really, really well is it's meant that over 18 weeks of rugby, when you get your last 4, anybody can beat anybody on the day. You saw it with Glasgow last year. Remember, it's not only the final, they went down to Thornton Park and beat the current champions Munster, and obviously we beat Leinster when I was still at the Bulls. They beat Leinster that year. So and then faltered in the final against where everybody thought, well, Glasgow are never going to be able to come all the way from Thurman Park, get on a plane, fly to South Africa and play. And they did. They did, because they were very well coached and they were very well prepared. And, I think the same of this weekend. I think the team out of those 4 who is probably the most nervous is probably Leinster. They in a manner of speaking, have probably got the most to lose. And they've got a really tough time. Is that Leinster game? I don't think it's at the Scotstown Stadium. I think it's in Dublin. I think that game is in Dublin.
Yes, it is.
It is in Dublin, yeah.
Yeah, it's not in Glasgow.
Yeah.
So they're in front of a home crowd. I think they're going to play it at the Aviva. It'll be a big crowd because it's a semi-final. Obviously, it's history what's happened this year in the Investec Champions Cup of them bowing out as early as they did. So the expectations are high there. It's been a couple of years since they won a trophy. And everyone thought that they were going to be, comfortable winners over the last couple of years, and that hasn't been the case. So Glasgow are definitely going to go to Dublin to back themselves to cause an upset. I'm interested in the psyche around the guys who are in the British and Irish Lions squad, and both those teams have got British and Irish Lions players, because I reckon that must be quite daunting. It must be playing on the guys' minds, because all of them are going to want to, really finish the season on a high and finish really well for their provincial teams. But they all got a half an eye on getting on the plane and going to Australia to play for the British and Irish Lions. And so that's an interesting dynamic for me, which you're only going to see every 4 years. And then obviously our derby is, I think you'd be a fool to try and predict it. On paper, you would say the Bulls. They've had another really, really good consistent season. They're just a machine at the moment. And they're a machine that kicks into another gear at home. And I think, with everything on the line, and obviously it being a local derby, Loftus, I'm really hoping and anticipating will be pretty full this weekend, and that's a play, like playing with the 16th man. It's really amazing. It's going to be hard, but if there's one team that has deceived us the whole season, is the Sharks, and the fact that they even in the semi-finals, and really by their own admission really haven't played well. They really haven't played good rugby at all. It would be nervous times, because this is probably the weekend the Bulls don't want them to click, because with their game breakers, if they click, they can be unbelievable. We know that. When you've got Apilele and my pimps and these guys, who can. Ethan Hooker's playing so well at the moment now as well. They're also star-studded. And for a lot of those guys, I mean, interestingly enough, when Plumbers put some of the reserves on, your Pepsis and the likes of those guys, Vincent's come on. They've really stepped up to the plate. And arguably sometimes more so than the Springboks. So, that's just. I know how well the Bulls will prepare. Both of them will prepare really well, but it's going to be a fierce game on both fronts. Yeah, I mean, again, the smart money would go on the two home teams, but that's the reason why I'm not a bookmaker, because I'd be bankrupt today because I'm useless at betting.
Sim, I'll let you take over. I lost a light here, but in fact, I'll do this in the dark, because the thing is, you asked me before we came on, or you mentioned something about a tough to call type weekend, because it maybe looks a lot more obvious than it really is. Glasgow, they know how to win. They know how to win this competition. They've done it. The Sharks haven't been at their best, like Gigi says, and if they are at their best, then even the Bulls will find them difficult to stop.
Look, I'll look for almost numbers to show why it's a complete fallacy to try and predict what's going to happen. So in the history of the competition, the team that's finished top of the table has never won it. So this is season 4. And then you look at Leinster. Leinster have never made it past the semi-final. So this is a big game for them. And then you look at Leinster and you look at Glasgow and you go, hang on. But they won 52-0 against the same Glasgow in the Champions Cup quarterfinal. But then I say, look at round 18 of the URC. The final score in that game was only 13-5, which is a much narrower sort of margin than, obviously. And then you come down to Loftus. At Loftus, Bulls have been to 2 finals, haven't won either in 3 years. So this is, actually, this is one of those weird situations where, like, even if they win the semi-final, they haven't really, won anything, because, well, for them, the litmus test is the final and winning it. And so that's, that puts pressure of its own, because, a lot of everybody else is looking past the semi-final, whereas they have to look at a team that has actually beaten them twice this season, that's done the double on them when they've dominated it. Yeah. And you imagine that they're not going to dominate the Sharks this time around in the semi-final. So, I mean, toss up a coin and work out, who you think is going to win as a result. And like Gary says, if those Sharks click, because they by far have the better team in terms of individual quality, because they've got so many Springboks, and so many of the Springboks are World Cup winning Springboks. I think in their pack alone, they've got 4 in their starting pack. Whereas if you look at the Bulls, they don't have a World Cup winner in their pack, even though they've got 6 Springboks. And so it's to be able to make a call out of that, geez, you got to be some kind of genius.
Yeah, gentlemen, I'm going to
Sharks,
insist that we leave it right there, because we could go on forever. No. Finish your thought, Gigi.
The Sharks did the same thing in the European Challenge Cup. I mean, they fundled around during the pool stages of the competition, finished top of their pool, won a playoff game. The next minute they were in the Challenge Cup final and ended up winning it, so that's a tough competition to win, and had to travel away from home and, against the odds, and they came good when it mattered. So, look, I agree with you. I mean, it's a fun debate to have, but it's a difficult debate to have. Again, as I say, on form, you would say Leinster at home and the Bulls at home. Again, when the Bulls have clicked, they're a lethal team as well. I mean, you've seen them. I mean, look at that first 10, 15 minutes in the second half against Scarlets on the weekend. I beg your pardon.
Edinburgh.
Against Edinburgh, they just ran them.
Edinburgh.
They ran them ragged off their feet. I mean, you would thought that Edinburgh had never defended in their life before, but I mean, it was the playmaking genius of the Bulls and the way they played. And they can do that to you, and before you know it, you can blink your eyes and they've scored 20 points quickly. So, that's what they have the ability to do. So, it's going to be I think it's going to be two great rugby games. And it's brilliant to watch, and I'm just selfishly delighted that this competition is such a highly competitive competition. It's brilliant for the game.
Yeah, super rugby. What? No, I feel like a kid in a candy store because the international season is also just around the corner as well. Starting with a Barbarians game for a little bit of entertainment and fireworks. I can't think of a better way to start the international season. Lions tour. It's too much. I don't know if my heart can take it. Gigi, if anybody's interested in finding out more about what it is you've been up to, do you have a site? Is there any way we can go?
I'm not really publicizing it. It's just for personal consumption. But yeah, go into the site, have a look if you want to. I'm on Instagram. If you want to drop me a note, if there's anything I can help anybody with, I'd love to. But yeah, I mean, I'm just doing it for my own personal development, really, and just interested to see if there is anything that's, we're using modern technology to be able to mine the data in a better way, and find things that are happening. And there's not a million silver bullets flying around, but there's one or two really nice pieces of information that are going around at the moment now.
Yeah, and also we had him on a couple of weeks ago, so you can check out Lessons from the Game, Gertrude Steenkamp's podcast. I know Gigi had a great chat with him and probably delving into a little bit more of the technical aspects. We were all over the show debating stuff, and if you joined early enough, we would have even been speaking about Jaden Hendrikse and winking, Gary. So at least you dodged that bullet. But thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate you changing your plans up just to have this chat. You're an absolute legend. Love talking to you, and I hope we can do it again sometime soon.
No problem at all, and it's really good to see you two guys again. It's long-time old friends that I haven't seen you guys for a while. So thanks for the invite. It means a lot. I really appreciate it. It's good to see you both.
Legendary. Thanks so much, Gigi. Take care of yourself, and hopefully I'll see you for a lekker cold beer when I'm next in the Cape. Some big weekend, big from a Springbok selection point of view. I think Gary made a great point about the guys who are in that Lions squad and how they show up. Likewise for the 54 who are in the Springbok squad and how they show up and whether they'll feel an extra little bit of motivation. But I can't wait for the weekend's games. I really am excited. I really genuinely am starting to feel that tinge of international rugby coming around.
Yeah, look, I'm also looking forward to it. The one thing I didn't mention about the Sharks and the Bulls is, is the great big intangible in the room, which is just culturally those two teams, since 1990 have never really liked each other. So forget the numbers, forget the results. It's just the sheer needle of we can't lose to these Oaks because, we don't do life the same. The cultures are so different. The teams are so different in outlook. So there's just so much, riding on this, that, you're sitting, as a spectator or as someone who's obviously got to try and make sense of it after the dust settled on Saturday. You're sitting there and you're thinking, whatever happens, there'll be an awful lot to say afterwards. And, I really look forward to it.
Yeah, no, as they say, Jono, he wants us to guess the score. I can't, not for this one. I wouldn't even want to hazard. I wouldn't even want to hit. I can only say that it'll be within a converted try. That's maybe as far as I'd go.
Okay, I'm going to go controversial. Okay. I'm going to go controversial. And frankly, I don't really believe what I'm saying. I'm saying it because I'm here now. Ask me in about 10 minutes, and I will have changed my mind. I reckon. I reckon Bulls don't lose a third game to the Sharks in the same season. One, and then the second one is Glasgow with Tupoluto, Henko Fenta, and Josh McKay back overturn the greatest humiliation in the history of Cup rugby, going from 52 zip to suddenly looking at nothing. Because remember, if you know, with Gary talking about how those Lions boys are feeling, or like what the mentality is going to be. Imagine how many Lions boys Leinster have compared to everybody else, simply because obviously the coach is the ex-Ireland coach of the British and Irish Lions.
And if
So
Glasgow
look,
score
I mean,
first and
it's
fast.
insane. It's insane to say Leinster are going to lose a semi-final again. But yeah, right here, right now, that's what I'm saying. But like I said, give me 10 minutes, I'll probably say, no, it's not happening at all.
Yeah. No, but I get you. I get why you would make.
Hope that answers Jono.
Yeah, no, it does. Jono's given his score prediction there, 31-29, which looks good to me. And I get what you're saying, Samai. Something tells me that the final is going to be in South Africa. I don't know if it's going to be Pretoria or Durban. I'm leaning Pretoria.
It's never been elsewhere.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's never been hosted anywhere else. It's just a weird sort of URC stats. It's just it's been insane. And obviously it's never been won by the same team ever.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I really haven't missed Super Rugby, I must admit, after what's been happening in the URC. But as they say, the Popo can dance, the Kak can spat. It's going to be hectic. And I so look forward to it. Always cool catching up, right? I can't wait until we do it again next week. And hopefully I'll bump into you at Loftus. But it's going to be a full house. I think there's like 2,000 tickets left. So I think the chances of moving easily around the stadium are min. So yeah, if we don't catch up then, we'll catch up here.
All good. See you next week.
Cheers. And everyone at home, thanks so much. Share this if you liked it. If we haven't bored you to sleep, thanks for the questions. This is what we love, is continuing the conversation. Catch us again, same time next week. Cheers and enjoy the rugby, guys. Ciao.